Welcome to another episode of the Move, Talk, Thrive podcast. Lizzie and I had the privilege to interview Bridget Thomas, who is the business owner of City Cave in Richmond. Now, if you haven't heard us talk about City Cave before, or burnout, or going to saunas or floats, have a listen back to some of our previous episodes where we've talked about burnout. We wanted to get Bridget on the podcast today to specifically talk about burnout from a holistic health point of view, what she does in her business to help health professionals, and also hear her journey, which is so inspirational and so encouraging. Now, she's also given a special offer to everyone who's listening to the podcast who lives in the Hawkesbury in Sydney. She's giving $10 off your first float or $10 off your first infrared sauna if you visit them at City Cave in Richmond. Now, you are going to learn all about the benefits of floating and saunas, so you will know why you need to access those after you listen to the episode. Now, Bridget is a wife and a mum to 3 children, and like I said, the proud owner of City Cave Float and Wellness Centre in Richmond. She spent 12 years as an emergency nurse, but her journey into holistic health began on a deeply personal note in 2022 when her husband was medically discharged from the new ambulance with severe PTSD. Witnessing his struggles and the incredible healing he experienced through float therapy inspired her to learn more about alternative therapies. Watching him heal his nervous system through the practice of floating was life-changing and sparked a desire to share the benefits of holistic health with others in her community. She's also passionate about talking about our nervous system and how we can regulate that and how important it is. She has been floating herself for 3 years, and she has also found it has had a profound impact on her own well-being. As I mentioned, she's a Hawkesbury local born and bred, and she's passionate about offering accessible preventative health services to the community. Without further ado, let's jump into the episode. Enjoy.
We are child development obsessed, business besties, and mums, and we're here to spill all our secrets.
We have a combined 30 years experience working with children, and each episode we will bring you up-to-date research and evidence-based strategies to set your children up to thrive.
I'm Lizzie Dawson, Australian exercise physiologist.
I'm Emily Mackey, Australian speech pathologist.
And this is the Move, Talk, Thrive podcast. Welcome, Bridget. We are so excited to have you here today to talk about your journey to owning a City Cave site. I don't know, do you call it a site, a clinic, or what do you call it?
Yeah, centre.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to hear your story and how you embarked on this journey and how that kind of really links back to self-care and, managing burnout, because that's such a big topic for health professionals. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to, owning a City Cave Centre.
Yeah, so I've got a history in nursing. I was an emergency nurse. My husband was a paramedic for 21 years. In about 2021, my husband got medically discharged with severe PTSD after being obviously frontline for so many years. So it was quite severe. He was told he'd never work again. He was only 43 years old. It was one of the worst cases they'd ever seen in someone at that age. So that kind of hit us quite hard. We knew that he had been struggling for a couple of years, but it kind of all came to a head, and it was at a point where it was not going to get fixed anytime soon. So he did all the traditional type treatments for PTSD that they send you to. He went to psychology, his GP, he went to psychiatrists, and he was doing the same thing for almost 2 years and seeing absolutely no real benefit, or he wasn't getting better. And I just said to him one day, I said, this is the definition of insanity. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again and nothing's changing. Like, something has to give. And a friend of ours owned another City Cave, and she actually said, why don't you try float therapy? And both of us initially were a bit skeptical. We thought, what's floating in a pool going to do for this? But we went along and tried float therapy, and I'm not going to lie, he hated his first float. He absolutely hated it. Being alone with his thoughts for an hour in that pool was just too much for him. But I'd started doing a bit of research and clinical research, and being in health, that's really important to us. So I started to do a bit of research, and I said to him, promise me you'll do it for 3 months. And if it doesn't help you, then you can stop it. But let's give it 3 months to see how we go. So he then did it for 3 months, and definitely by the end of 3 months, we were starting to see so many improvements with him. The first thing we noticed was probably his sleep. So his sleep started to go back to a regular pattern, which is really important for people with PTSD, as they've really got to spend their whole lives almost regulating their sleep, because once their sleep goes, everything tends to go. So his sleep was the first thing to improve. And then after that, we saw him being able to regulate his emotions better, which meant his anxiety was decreasing. And I just knew from then that we needed to bring this back out to the world. It was amazing. It was holistic. It was natural. And yeah, so we then opened a cave 2 years later. It took us about 2 years to find a building, but we knew I was born and bred in the Hawkesbury, and I knew this is where I wanted to do it, because the Hawkesbury people, we've been through enough of our own trauma out here in the Hawkesbury. They're a resilient bunch, but we don't really have anything like this out in the Hawkesbury. So we made it our mission to then bring this into our home area, and that's where we are now. We opened in May 2024.
Amazing. That's such a it's so, I mean, I've been through my own health journey, and I think that nothing kind of gets you to try some alternative therapies than when you're really unwell, because when your health is taken away from you, it's kind of make or break, isn't it? You're like, I've got to figure out something to do. And I think that's so good. And I definitely resonate with just looking into the research and identifying that you need to give it a good stint as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we always say to people, if you go once, it's like riding a bike. If you jump on a bike once in your whole life, you're probably going to struggle the next time you get on. So yeah, absolutely. You need to commit to it. But I think when it comes to your health, I think that deserves the biggest commitment out of anything, because you only get one body. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think when you lose your health, you will do that to figure out what you can do to get back on track. And I know for myself, when you lose sleep, everything falls apart. So I think that's such an interesting perspective. Is there research that is linking it to it with improved sleep? What's the actual process there? Do you know?
Yeah, so there's a clinical neuropsychologist. His name's Dr. Justin Feinstein. Big fan of his. He's pioneering float therapy. So he's from Maui, over in America, and he's actually just set up his own, I guess it's a big center. It's through Maui Calm, and it's a trauma center for all the people in Maui who have just been through all those bushfires. And they're using float therapy as a form of trauma therapy over there. But he's done lots and lots of studies. He's had people in float tanks before with EEG machines on their brain to see what the brain waves are doing while they're floating, MRIs on people, pre and post a good amount of time floating. He's done lots of research, and the evidence is showing that an hour of float therapy is equivalent to 4 hours of sleep. So, and that doesn't mean you have to be asleep in a float tank for an hour. That's not what that.
No.
Some people think, oh, I need to have I need to sleep for the hour. That's not what it's saying at all. It's just that hour of your brain having that rest for an hour is equivalent to how we would feel if we had 4 hours of sleep.
And is it the same as, say, meditation, or is there something about the magnesium in the water that is kind of making it even more potent?
Yeah, well, magnesium is a mineral that every organ in our body needs, and it's responsible for over 300 chemical reactions in our bodies. So it's really good for heart health, skin health, kidneys. Every organ in our body needs magnesium. So that is helping as well, and helping get you into that relaxed deep state of relaxation. But because you're in a room it's about sensory deprivation. So you're in a room that is heated to the perfect degrees. And that's very deliberate, because when that happens, when the water in the room is heated to the right temperature, the part of our brain that controls and regulates our body temperature gets to go offline for a little while and have a rest. You're also in a room, of darkness. You don't have to be. I always people have the option, but the ideal float is then a room of complete darkness, and no sound whatsoever. And it's just about sensory deprivation, turning off things that are going in, feeding our brain constantly, to just give our brain that hour of rest. Because when we can actually rest our brain, that's when it can start to heal.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I go to City Cave, my local City Cave, most weeks. I don't do the float, I do the sauna. And the reason I don't do the float is because it makes me anxious. I have actually done it before with the lights out and got lost in the pool. I'm like feeling around. And so but I guess it resonates with me that you've said to your husband to do it for 3 months, because I think it's like meditation when if you're anxious, or for me, I do it and it makes me actually more anxious. It's like when you do breathing for people that are anxious, you're like, oh my gosh, my breathing's going really fast.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's really interesting. And I think it's really powerful to understand what it actually is about it that's working, because that makes me feel differently about it immediately.
Yeah. And I always say that to people. I say, people get in there, and because they're not used to having an hour alone with your thoughts, we're always distracted. People pick up a phone when they're not feeling, or when they're feeling anxious, they'll go to a phone or they'll go to something else. And I always say to people, don't have an expectation. Just come in, just do it. And the more you do it, the easier it will get and the better it will get. And yeah, I know some people have come in first float, absolutely loved it, been in tears because they've just had this huge healing moment where they've forgiven their mother in the womb and all this sort of stuff. But I've had people even still now who are members who are in weekly, who it's taken, a couple of months for them to switch off. But I always say to everyone, if you have those thoughts, just acknowledge it and let it go. Don't try to suppress the thought, because we've tried to suppress our thoughts and emotions our whole life, and it's clearly not working for us. So let the thought come, just acknowledge the thought that, okay, yeah, that's fine, that's the thought, and then you just let it go. Don't give it too much time, because then you'll just spiral out of control.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened to me, because I did the float once, and I came when you guys opened. So Bridget's clinic is literally probably walking distance from our clinic at Speak About. And so they were like, come and try it. And I did the float, and yeah, I felt like I had ADHD in it. And I was like going crazy. And I came out and I said to whoever was there, I said, I hated that. Like, I really struggled with that. And I really felt dysregulated afterwards, which I knew is probably telling me that I am dysregulated already. But I think definitely giving it a go. But it is hard. So I want to go back to that process a little bit. Like, even with your husband, when he started doing it, like, because obviously you said he was the most severe case that they had seen, right?
Yeah.
Which like, that's bad. That's very bad. So what was that process for him like of 3 months? Because obviously we can say at the start he was so severe, and then after 3 months he was sleeping better. But like, what was that a really hard process in there? Like, what did that look like?
So we just, obviously he committed to that 3 months for me. And we did couples floats. So most people with PTSD or people with trauma, they have a real issue with mistrust. So they don't trust anyone, anything, they've been really traumatized in situations. So they have mistrust. So I went along with him, and he only did couple floats for the first few months. I promised him, I got the benefits, really. I'm not complaining. I got the benefits of going anyway. But I just said to him, I'll just come with you. Like, it's fine. Let's do this together. And yeah, he, even over that 3-month period, it's not like every float got better. Do you know what I mean? It was like he'd have a really amazing float, and then the next one might not be so amazing, but then he might have a good one. And we knew that regardless of how his interpretation of the float was, we knew it was still going to be benefiting him. Purely soaking in, there's 450 kilos of magnesium in the pools. So purely soaking in the magnesium was going to give him the benefits. Magnesium's a natural muscle relaxant. So we knew you know, it acts like a bit like a benzodiazepine. So people get put on Valium and stuff. So we knew it was going to have the similar effects. But yeah, he just would have some really good floats. He'd have some not good floats. And he learnt over time not to overthink it. It was a float. I just had a float. It wasn't necessarily a really amazing float. It wasn't a really terrible float. I had a float. And now, you know, obviously years later, he floats on his own. But yeah, for those first few months, especially, I just did couples floats with him. And that's what I always say to people, for your first float, you know, you're coming in and you're trusting me, you know, to come into one of our float pools. You have no idea what it is or what it's about. And I always say to people, your first float is about seeing what it is. The second float, you come along and you at least trust us because you've come back. You know what to expect. You can settle in a little bit more by the second float. By the third float, usually people are sold. Like usually it's those 3 floats in quick succession. We always say don't leave it a month or 2 in between because he's like starting all over again. But once you've done those first few in quick succession, it's usually quite easy to transition to regular floating.
And when you say he had a bad float and a good float, like what was that? Was like he coming out not feeling good? Or
Yes.
how do you
Yeah.
define that?
Yeah, so a good float would be that he'd obviously fall asleep after a night of no sleep. You know, he may have had a night of really severe flashbacks to trauma and to jobs that he had, and then he'd go into a float and he'd be able to fall asleep for the hour. So that's what he would consider a good float. Another good float would just be that he could lay still without racing thoughts. Probably one of the, you know, a couple of bad floats that he remembers would be he was, you know, in there, but yeah, just the thought would come into his head of something really traumatic. So what they call flashbacks in PTSD, and that would come in and he was unable to then emotionally regulate. So a couple of times he got out earlier from the float. But a few times also you'll notice in a float, people talk about it all the time, and it's really funny. You'll notice that you could almost be asleep or, you know, in such a deep state of relaxation, and all of a sudden you do a big and I still do it now. And I find it so amazing because people get worried about that. They're like, oh, you know, and then they have fear about that. And I just try to explain to people that all that is simply your body and your mind are trying to enter such a state of relaxation, and you're not used to that. You're not used to, you don't, it's like we still have to control everything. And we're like, no, don't go there. Okay, I'm up, I'm awake, like it's fine. And I just say to people, just let it go. And if that happens, that's okay. You just let it go. But one float in particular for Craig that changed, I would say changed everything and really put him on such a healing trajectory. He was lying in a float and he was very, very relaxed, and he almost felt like an electric shock feeling sort of in his back. And it did give a big jolt to him. And when we were speaking, you know, to his therapist afterwards and everything, even they said that was probably his nervous system resetting in such a positive way that from that float on, he'll always put it to that float. He remembers from then on, it was like leaps and bounds in his improvement.
And when was that? Was that around the 3-month?
Yeah, that would have been around the 3-month mark of floating. And then after that, you know, he floated still regularly, but he didn't have to do it every week after that. But we noticed, you know, his sleep wouldn't slide back, and he was able to then process. And he still did other therapy alongside it. He did EMDR therapy, which helped him process all the, you know, jobs. But we found even with that you were able to get more improvement from each session because he was already regulated. He wasn't going into a session dysregulated.
I see a psychologist, and it's always the sessions where I'm like, oh, I don't really need it, that I have the best sessions, because it's like I'm in this state where I'm not kind of having to unpack like an immediate kind of crisis or something going on, and I'm like open, and we tend to get a lot deeper and get better healing benefits because I'm in a regulated, healthy mindset. So I think that's really true.
Yeah.
And what frequency in that 3 months, and even now, what sort of frequency are you guys floating?
So for those 3 months, he was floating weekly, definitely. Yeah. There'd be some weeks you might go for, you know, 2 in a week, and then it might be 10 days, but it was on average, I'd say weekly for the 3 months. Now we don't float anywhere near as much as we would like to because we're very busy making sure everyone else is floating, but we would still be floating, I would say now, at least fortnightly. And, you know, going in between sauna and float, massage. Craig loves massage as well, so he kind of flicks between all of them. I'm huge on sauna and float. I love a good massage. I don't have the time.
Yeah,
It is a bit
sometimes you have
like
to
that
choose.
when you've got your business and you're starting up as well, because you
Yeah.
just you opened in last year, right?
Yeah, May. Yeah.
You know what that's like, yeah.
Yeah. Not a year yet.
No, yeah, it is very full on when you start anything new, especially a business in those first, I'm gonna say 5 years, it's
Yeah.
full.
4 to go.
Yeah. So with the sauna, talk to us about the sauna then, because you
So,
said you do a sauna and a float, or what's that like?
yeah.
Yeah, talk about
So
that.
here at City Cave, we have infrared saunas. So they're not the traditional sauna. Some people go, oh no, I can't do a sauna. And, they're talking about your traditional saunas, which are your wet saunas where they, you pour the water on the rocks. So those saunas are between 80 and 120 degrees. So they're very hot. You're only meant to be in for a short amount of time, 5 to 10 minutes. And what those saunas do, they heat up the air. Okay. And then that causes you to sweat. And then that helps you lose weight, but also lose toxins from your skin through your sweat. So infrared sauna is very different. They're much more tolerable. So it's 45 minutes in an infrared sauna. And what that's doing, the infrared heat heats up the core of our body instead of the air around us. It slowly heats up. 48 to 53 degrees is an ideal temperature for your infrared saunas. And as that's heating up the core of your body, what happens at around the 30-minute mark, it does what's a bit of it uses heat proteins, which is like a bit of an immune response that's happening in our body around the 30-minute mark, which is really good because then what that does helps the production of T cells and white blood cells, which help fight infection and inflammation. So moves around lactic acid in our body, really good for cardiovascular health because it vasodilates all our blood vessels and pumps everything around, but it also lowers our cortisol. And that's why I love it. So cortisol is our stress hormone that we all know about. And it lowers our cortisol and takes us from that fight flight into rest and digest. So it works with our parasympathetic nervous system and really helps calm us down. So we have a range of people that use them for different things. Some ladies are using them for menopausal symptoms because they're helpful with your hormones, regulating hormones. So those hot flushes become less when you're using regular saunas. But yeah, people use it for chronic pain, autoimmune diseases. People are using it for that. Again, nervous system dysregulation because of what it does with your cortisol. And yeah, general relaxation. We get a lot of athletes here that use it for muscle recovery. So very different to a traditional sauna. A lot more toxins released through an infrared sauna than would be through a traditional sauna. Helps to get a lot of heavy metals out of our body. So, that we get from environmental, what we're eating, what's in the air, all those sorts of things, what we put into our body. So a lot of heavy metals get released out of our body as well.
I feel so amazing after an infrared sauna. There's nothing like it. It's like I just get an injection of energy. Like I can be totally flat and I'm like, right, I'm going to the sauna. And it's so, I can't wrap my head around it because it feels like it should be making me like, and I think it's maybe because I've always kind of done saunas and my mind goes back to, the old school saunas, which do make you feel a little bit tired afterwards, but infrared definitely, just gives me so much energy.
Yeah, it is an energy boost. I always feel so clean coming out of a sauna because, you've had a good sweat and I just feel so much clean. And yeah, you're right. The energy level just instantly, goes up. And it's, we've got the difference also being in an infrared sauna, you can take a book in because it's not wet sauna. So we get a lot of people go in, they come here to do their journaling and that's where they sit and journal in an infrared sauna. It is good. Ours also have Bluetooth capability, which we don't necessarily push for people to, have to be on a phone if you don't need to be. But obviously, some people use it to put on a podcast, music, whatever you want as well.
Yeah, I've got this playlist that's on Insight Timer that is my sauna playlist, and I go in and I put it in and it's exactly 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And the last 15 minutes is this really cool guided meditation. And yeah, it's like my sauna thing. And now I've actually recently, because I've been really busy, so I haven't been able to get to the sauna as much, but I put that playlist on and it kind of takes me to that sauna experience. Because I'm like, oh, just imagine I'm there.
That's
I
cool.
liked my sauna experience too, actually. When I came, I did the sauna and the float, and I felt really good after the sauna. I was like, this is good. I could keep coming back to do this.
Yeah.
So what, like there's so much there to unpack, like in terms of all the benefits. So maybe with the sauna, what, how would people, if people are feeling like, well, sorry, if people are feeling really tired, if people are feeling really lethargic, maybe lacking motivation, maybe, not feeling like they're getting a restful night's sleep. Like, what would you say? Where would you say to start?
Well, I would say, if someone's experiencing all of those things, I'd say start at the beginning and let's call it for what it could be, which sounds like burnout, right? If you're chronically in that state where all of those things are sort of becoming your norm and your life, let's look at the possibility that you are probably, if not in burnout, you're probably getting close to burnout. We always have a saying here at the cave that if you don't make time for your health, sickness will make time for you. So, we always have to, and it's about that preventative measures, getting on top of how you're feeling and taking, ownership of that and doing something about it. I think there's such a mentality that self-care is selfish. And I just think it's crazy because I think, we can't be the mum we are, we can't be the businesswoman we are, we can't give out of an empty cup. So I think, yeah, definitely we get people that come here and they just say to us, I don't know what I need. These are my symptoms. What do we do? We would usually always say to people a flauna, which is the sauna, and a float. So do the two together. But we have people that just float because that's what they need. Some people that just sauna, some people that just come and massage because that alone has its own benefits. But yes, come along, we get people just coming and chatting to us and then finding out what is right for them. But I think, yeah, calling it for what it is, let's be honest, it's probably heading to burnout if this is something that's chronic and you've been struggling with. And even with kids, like I say, some people go, oh, what could kids have to be burnt out about these days? And I'm like, these kids are living in a world that is nothing like I grew up in. They've got so much that they could be burnt out about. And I think being able to teach kids from a very young age that it is totally okay and normal and healthy to stop and look after yourself and not have input of some sort just for an hour. So yeah, I think it's important that we help foster that in children from a young age so they don't keep growing up thinking their brain has to be filled with something every second that they're awake.
Absolutely. And that was my other thought that I was going to ask you next was you were talking a lot about regulation and dysregulation. And we talk a lot about that with our kids in therapy. And me and Liz have done a lot of podcasts about that. Have you got children? What is it? What is there research with children doing this sort of thing?
Yeah, so same research with children as with kids. It's a little bit harder with younger kids, obviously, because getting them to lay still in a pool for an hour is a bit more challenging. But here we definitely have those 10, 11-year-olds. I know my daughter has been floating since she was 10. So they go in with a parent because the pools are the size of a double-side bed. So they can go in with the parent at that age and do it. And yeah, sometimes they just have a shorter float. Half an hour later, they may have had enough and they come out. But the more they do it, the longer they're able to stay in for. And they're getting the exact same benefits that an adult's getting. Their cortisol's being lowered. They're able to manage their emotions better, but even creativity. So because the left and the right hemisphere of the brain, well, because your brain's at rest, the synapses can cross over and people actually get really creative ideas when they're in a float pool because there's no other input. There's nothing you're seeing, there's nothing you're hearing. And a lot of people get really cool creative ideas while they're in there. But yeah, we get a lot of kids with ADHD, so whose parents come and bring them along. Because even, ADHD burnout is so real, trying to manage those symptoms day in and day out for these little kids. And so, yeah, they come in and yeah, some of them have had shorter floats, but then they get longer and longer. And we haven't had a kid that hasn't loved it when they've left. Kids are actually more open and receptive than adults.
Yeah, interesting. I know I put some magnesium salts in my kids' baths when they're a little bit crazy. I will before bedtime and I'll put a little bit of lavender and a bit of bath salts in there. That's something like I've always done. Have you done that to him?
Yeah, I've done the lavender and the magnesium salts. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not, I mean, it's obviously more intense, but maybe like more beneficial as well.
Sometimes I put the drops in the shower as well
Mm.
on the floor around them.
Yeah. And even we have magnesium spray here and oils. We always say with the kids, just rub it on the soles of their feet. So our feet have the biggest pores in our body out of everywhere. So, rub it into the soles of their feet. And most people notice their sleep improve dramatically when they start rubbing magnesium oil into their kids' feet at nighttime.
Maybe I need to
I
start.
need to do that.
Both of us are like, we need to do that.
I need to do it for myself. I need to do it for my children.
Oh, the last what is it? The last 2 nights we went down to Sydney on Sunday, and then we had this plan that we would drive the kids home at night and that they would fall asleep and then we'd transfer them to bed. They were up till 10 o'clock. They didn't sleep in the car on the way home. And then Monday was really difficult. And I had to get Evie off to school. And yeah.
Oh,
So
no.
we're in the thick of it, Bridget. So I'm like, maybe I will try that.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yes, I mean that's young kids, but that's like I'm always aware though. I'm like, what's what's going on with regulation here? What's happened through the day? How can I help? How can I support? I don't just want to put it down to, you're not just, misbehaving. Like, how can I help you?
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know that about the feet. So yeah, thank you.
Funny, I always think that as well. I had this conversation the other day about, behavioral kids at school, like kids that have these behaviors. And, I think if we dive into that a bit deeper, most of the time they're not regulated, but also, their maturity levels, like, is it a behavioral problem or is it like an emotional problem? Let's not just dismiss it for, you're being a really difficult kid today. You're just being naughty. Because there's every chance, with little ones especially, that there's more going on behind the scene there. And they need us to be able to help regulate them because they don't know. They're learning.
Yeah.
There's always more under behavior. Like the behavior is just the outcome of whatever they're struggling with underneath. This is what I keep saying to my husband when my 5, almost 6-year-old is running rings around the dinner table and doing all sorts of things. I'm like, he's tired, he's struggling. It's the end of the day, and what can we
We're
do
tired,
right
we're
now?
struggling. It feels worse.
Yeah, totally. So,
Yeah.
and I think like the key message in all of this is whilst, you've used it, your family has used it as a treatment and an alternative treatment as part of your healthcare for a significant health situation. There's so much power in the preventative health and topping ourselves up. And I think that something that has been, front and center for Em and I in this podcast is talking about burnout because it is so prevalent with health professionals, and you obviously have experienced that yourself. So I think that's such a key piece in this is giving ourselves that time and putting in these practices that are really going to set us up for neutralizing those symptoms of burnout.
Yeah. And we have a lot of people now. We've kind of, tried to really drive, especially within our network, which, we have a network of police, and AMBOs in particular, trying to drive it now, that preventative side of it, rather than waiting till you're where Craig got to, trying to use it as a preventative treatment. And we do have a lot of them that are coming in using it for a preventative treatment. You still get, those that unfortunately it's too late. They're past that and they've now hit where Craig was. But even with that, it's just such an honor to be able to walk with them and to say it's okay. I think, when you get a diagnosis of PTSD, it sounds so final. Like I'll never forget being in the doctor's surgery and them going, "Oh, you'll never work again. Like that's it, you're done. It's the worst case I've ever seen." And just going, "Oh my gosh, like he's 43, we've got 3 kids. What do you mean? How does this look?" And I'm a little bit stubborn. And I kind of, that day I said to Craig, this won't be our story. Like I refuse for that to be our story. And then just worked really, really, really hard to come out the other side. And he's amazing, even now he's still very careful. Like if he's having, if he's not, he's very good now at regulating his emotions and being self-aware. And if he's having a bad day, he'll, slow down. He'll go have a float. He'll do something else. But where he is today compared to where he was a few years ago, it's just like a different person. So it's amazing.
I'm interested to know as well, because you're obviously his support person. That is just really stressful, and I think people probably underestimate the amount that can weigh on someone when your partner, be it family, your husband, wife is going through something like that. It can take a real toll on you, whether you have got the, health diagnosis or like officially burnt out. What sort of impact did it have on you going through that same sort of process?
Yeah, I think looking back, I had a level of PTSD probably anyway through vicarious trauma. So trauma that I was exposed to through ambulance and through Craig's trauma. So I wasn't physically there, but vicariously it traumatized me as well. And it was really hard because at that time, COVID had hit. We had our eldest daughter doing her HSC. So it was, it was a really, really tough time. And I think initially I put on my fighting boots, like it's okay, this is fine, we're going to get through this. But I did get to a point, maybe 6 months down the track, I would say I was almost borderline into adrenal fatigue. So I lost 15 kilos in a few months. It was hard work. And I just had to make that. I mean, I was floating with him, which was really good. That was some self-care as well. And just being mindful. I was journaling. I had to really just be deliberate in the little things that I could do. Because whilst, some days he was really good, there were some days he couldn't physically leave the house. That was too much. Like there was too much fear. There was anxiety. He couldn't even leave the house. So yeah, support network, we always say to people, make sure you're surrounded by amazing people who are there to help you and support you and not judge you. And we had that. So without that, it may have been a very different story. But yeah, you just have to, as I said before, you can't pour into anyone else if your cup's empty. So trying to do whatever it is, and some people may not be able to do an hour float. That may be too much for someone. But even just 5 minutes of journaling or just, laying out on the grass in nature for 5 minutes may be all you need just to get through that next day.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes people overcomplicate it. They think that they need to go on a holiday. I've been reflecting on this recently over the last few months because I gave myself a really hard time for not getting, the 6-week school holiday break. I was like, this is why I've got a business to have school holidays off. But really what I recognized was that 4 days of decompressing, and I was really at the end of my tether at the end of last year, but 4 days I was good. So I think, and I quite often will say, a cup of tea in the sun, like just knowing the things that make you feel better. And for me, one of those is the infrared sauna, like getting to that once a week, I know is going to top me up. And if I'm like, I try to be preventative about that, but in the case that I've missed it, it's something that when I'm like down, when the chips are down a little bit in terms of energy and all those symptoms start to pop up, I'm like, right, sauna is like one of the first things that I go to. So I think it's about being aware and also not overcomplicating it and going, okay, the journaling, the meditation, the sauna, like the toolkit that you have is really important to just be aware of and make time for on a daily basis and weekly basis to fill our cup. And I think as health professionals, this couldn't be more important. It's our responsibility to come and help others. That's the job that we have taken. So the first step in that responsibility is taking care of ourselves, because otherwise we won't be able to do that. So I think this is such an important conversation to be having and to be sharing, at the other end of the spectrum, what happens and how these things still benefit, and how prevention is really key to making sure that we're looking after ourselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Lizzie's always been really good with this. I am still on a journey with it, as everyone knows. I always talk about it, but I think, I love that you, Lizzie, you prioritize and you have like that time. Like I always find that really difficult to go, where is that time? And obviously everyone's in different seasons as well. So if you're listening to this, it's going, my situation is unique, you know, where I'm at. If you're single, if you're married, if you've got little kids, older kids, where if you're starting a business, like, you know, I'm now 11 years into my business. So I'm out of that startup phase. Lizzie's gone back to startup phase. Bridget, you're in startup phase. Like it's very different to where you put everything. For me, it's like I did get very burnt out last year. And I think that's because we moved, like I've spoken about this in a few last episodes, but we moved and that was a lot bigger than what I thought. And then having small kids and then traveling and then having the business as well. But I think for me, it's like I aspire to do what Lizzie's doing in terms of the time. And I always listen to it. I'm like, okay, I know that's my plan down the track. But I think probably if you're got limited time, it's knowing what the one or two activities would be for you. So for me, that's my prayer time. My faith is so important. So that's my prayer time. And then it's reading. We've done an episode on books. I'm an avid reader. So whatever the book is, that's what I will be reading. So those two activities I can squeeze in. And I've been really trying this year to put them in. Even if it's sometimes I'm just saying to the kids, okay, just give me 10 minutes. I'm going to have my cup of tea and I'm going to read. And they always say, Mummy, are you having your cup of tea? Are you having your cup of tea? I'm like, yes. So that means leave me alone.
I mean,
I think
that's so good though.
yeah.
That's so good.
So
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to demonstrate that to them. Like, if I have my cup of tea, that makes me sit down.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'll just look out the window, you know, like just try and sit and be. Also, but I feel like if I read them, they don't jump on me. So and so it's just, I'm just trying to show you like it's different seasons and different scenarios of like, you know, what works and just trying. I think the key, like Lizzie said, is prevention, right? If you can't get to it, it's okay. You know, and it's just putting, like you said, knowing the cup, you can't pour from an empty cup. So just putting that as a priority as much as you can and knowing what your activities are. One day when I don't have a 2-year-old, I would love to be doing the infrared saunas more often.
I think it's so true, Emily. I agree. You know, and I often think if we were to write a list of things that we really enjoy, you know, even if we just pulled from that list every now and then. So, and it's so they can be so simple, like something so amazing for me that I rate so highly, and it's nothing important, but is beautiful, freshly cleaned sheets that have been dried out in the sun. And even just things like that, like it doesn't cost anything. You don't have to go anywhere to do it, especially if you're a stay-at-home mum. We've all been it. I stayed at home with my kids as well. You know, and you feel like you're pulling your hair out and you're never, ever, ever going to get out of that season. But simple things like that make all the difference. Because when I get into bed that night, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. You know, and it's nothing like but it's still on my list of things that I love and make me feel good, you know. Like you said, Emily, prayer time. So, you know, for me, praying, you know, when I had little kids felt like it was almost impossible. I couldn't devote, you know, hours and hours to prayer or, you know, reading my Bible. But with kids, you know, I remember every time I did a nappy, I'd just pray. Like it was, you know, something really quick as I was changing a nappy or, you know, and I think that's so okay. And people just need to be okay with that. Like, yeah, you're in different seasons. And yeah, time will come as the kids get older. But yeah, don't beat yourself up for the season you're in now. Just do what you can do, as simple as it is. Cup of tea, out watching the kids play, getting your shoes off and being grounded on the ground and actually feeling the earth beneath our feet is so, so, so healing. Yeah, things like that.
Absolutely.
The other day about the ground and having bare feet. Obviously, it's great for kids, but we need to make sure that we are doing that as adults. We just always wear shoes everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, even simple things like that, right?
Yeah. I'm in cave with no shoes on right now. I love it. I just feel so much more connected when I can feel the ground beneath me.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, that's
That's so
awesome.
good. Do you have any research, Bridget, that you could share that we could put as links, which maybe our therapist could read about or if we put the links below, if there's any about pediatrics or children, because our therapists as well, they will then empower parents.
Yeah.
So if there's anything like that that you've got, that might be great that we can pop below.
Yep. Definitely. I can give you
Yeah.
some of those, especially around floating. With infrared saunas, we don't have kids in saunas purely because they can't regulate their own body temperature yet. So it's not safe to have them in a sauna, little kids. By the time they get to, your teens, your 13s, 14s, it's totally okay. They just go in for shorter periods of time, have more breaks in between. But yes, saunas are an off limit for little kids. And for pregnant women, saunas are off limit. But yeah, floating is perfectly safe for pregnancy. But I can give you some links for floating for children.
Is there any links between learning difficulties? Sorry, when they're older, like you got 13-year-olds and above, anything like that?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I'll dive into it. Justin Feinstein has amazing things. So he's done so much research. He actually did, there is data, he wrote an article on it about people with eating disorders. And he was floating these people who were end stage, anorexia, and nothing else was really working. And it was only a small amount of people, but out of the people that he floated regularly for a few months, a lot of them ended up walking out healed and better. Purely because it's, most of it is rooted in a nervous system disorder. And once we heal, our nervous system, and my staff always laugh at me here because I always say we have everything we need to heal within us if given the right environment. We were created to heal ourselves. We just need the right environment to do it in.
That's so true. And I think something that's really important there is it's not even, if it's good, like for the children, if there's research on it for the children, it's for therapists, it's for parents, because that if we can regulate our own nervous system, that's going to go a really long way to help children regulate their own, and just in terms of co-regulation, like if we can put our oxygen mask on first, then I think that is going to go a long way in terms of helping these children that are struggling to regulate themselves.
Yeah. And kids know when we're, regulated from such a young age. And it's like they're the days that the kids are out of sorts more and you're kind of like bouncing off each other. I remember, I think back to when I had young kids and I was like, I was so not regulated very well back then. And it was those days that the kids were like off the charts and you're like, what is going on?
Hindsight's a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah.
They know. I tell my team the kids can smell fear. Like if you go in there and you're not commanding the room, they can smell the fear and they'll start to take advantage of it. And it's the same with regulation. Like when we're upset or we're dysregulated, they know and they'll just start pushing the buttons more and more.
Yeah. My son's 17 now, so he's got inattentive ADHD, and he's been floating for a couple of years as well now, and he just loves it. And he's obviously got the blessing of parents owning a float center, so he can come in and have a 3-hour float, and he has done before. He's just had a 3-hour float, but the creativity that he comes out with after his floats is amazing. He's not innately creative. Like I wouldn't say he's innately creative. He's quite analytical. But yeah, what floats do to him, he comes out with the most, creative ideas or visions and all of that sort of stuff. And then he will sleep a lot better at nighttime. So he has a hard time winding down and getting sleep at night. He'll always have, we all do. We always know after a float we're going to be out like a light. So yeah.
What's the best time of day to be doing it for that?
For people, if it's a sleep problem, obviously at nighttime is good. You can do it at any time, but I always say nighttime's good. We're open till 9 o'clock at night. So your last float goes in at 7:30. And then by the time you have that and go home, you really have a shower, get in your PJs and you're ready for bed. So that's always a good one. But people find the effects of a float, 48 hours later. So usually the second night after a float is almost better like for the sleep than the first time after a float. And that's what they've shown. So data has shown the benefits of a float lasting longer than, all these medicines we're giving ourselves to try and regulate things or to bring us to a state of calm. And again, Dr. Justin Feinstein's huge on that. So he's working alongside others to try and get Big Pharma to notice that there are other ways to deal with this. Let's not just keep writing these scripts for young ones if it's not working. Let's try something else.
That's amazing for our therapists to have in their toolkits and their tool bags when they're talking to parents, because often we become a bit of a like a case manager or a case worker, and a parent will come in and say X, Y, and Z has nothing to do with like EP or speechy stuff, but it's helping the child holistically and then helping them. Like as a therapist, we see their potential. So it's helping them reach their potential. And like, if then that's unlocking the creative part of their brain, which even if a child's analytical, they need creative for school. Like it's just the way it goes. You can't stick in one side of your brain until you've left school and you choose a profession or a job, you know, where you just do one thing.
Yeah.
So that is really what we're all about as therapists, is helping children reach their potential in a holistic way. So that's, I mean, it's a great thing if you're, because city caves are everywhere, right?
Yeah, the whole east coast of Australia, you'll find a cave. Also now over in America. So they've now opened up in Florida and Texas over in America. So yeah, you don't have to go far and you'll be able to get to a cave.
Yeah, so you can,
There's
as
about 80 now, maybe 80 caves that are open.
That's a lot. Like you should be able to find some locally for your children if you're seeing them in therapy. I think if you've got a business or you're an employee, you know, working in that area, connect with your local cave providers. If you're listening and you're local to the Hawkesbury in some capacity, connect with Bridget and her team to have that in your therapy toolbox as your work or in a workplace or your clinic to know to refer on, because that's what I think also helps your children in their therapy sessions, right? If they can regulate, or the parents are regulated, then that helps regulate the children. And it's sort of, you know.
And I know some caves are NDIS approved, so I know that helps people as well. So we aren't yet, so we're hoping to start undertaking that process. But yeah, there are some caves that are NDIS approved, so they service a lot of people through that as well.
Oh, if you got that, I think you'd be inundated.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
the process.
Yeah, there's a lot of need. Well, thank you so much, Bridget. This has been so helpful, so interesting and inspiring, and like just also your personal story, but then also learning about the research and about floats and, you know, how that works. I think this is going to be so helpful for our listeners. Do you have anything to add, Lizzie?
Book me in. I'm going to book in a float this week. I'm going to up my sauna ante and get into a float because I have so much trouble with sleeping, being 43 this year, say no more. So yeah, sign me up.
Well, we'll keep track, Lizzie. You can report back to how we're going.
We're going to hold you accountable.
Yeah. No, I will. Don't worry. I will book it in. I'm like, right, that's my Friday sorted.
Awesome. So
Thanks,
if
ladies.
you're so welcome. If you have any other questions, where can people reach you?
So you can email us at richmond@citycave.com.au. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, City Cave Richmond.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, always DM Move Talk Thrive podcast on Instagram, and we'd be happy to help you out. Until next week, have a lovely week, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.